So that's why, because we should care about people buried in our, in our cemeteries, and because they're under duress and they're of historical value. So what have I learned about the cemetery to date? And again, leveraging the fact that some people have done a lot of work before me. So let's just kind of walk through this. Lot 83, that's an important point here, and if you look here, you can see the icon for the cemetery itself. As most folks, or I would imagine a lot of folks here in this room know, Cortland was largely settled by soldiers. The end of the Revolutionary War, there wasn't a lot of money in the federal government, which is why John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were off begging to Europe for money to get credit, etc. So we gave land away, which probably the Native Americans didn't like so much, but we gave them land as compensation instead of money. So a lot of these large square acre, obviously larger than acre, this acreage was given to them as compensation. And so this particular lot, number 83, was given to this fellow here, Philippe Van Cortland. And there was a legislative act in New York State in 1786. So he's a big shot. Simply put, he's one of these people who, he's not like the rest of us that live quiet little lives of desperation. He's a big shot. So his grandfather was the first native mayor of New York City. His father was Pierre Van Cortland, who co-authored, among other people, obviously, the Constitution, and he was the first lieutenant governor. He was in the Revolutionary War, was a brigadier general under Lafayette, and then after that he kind of moved up. I'm not sure that he moved up here, but basically they gave him the land, and he became a big shot in Cortland. So he was town supervisor, road commissioner, or school commissioner and roadmaster. And then from there, he was a delegate to the Assembly. He was a delegate to the state. He was a New York State congressman in the House of Representatives. And obviously, Cortland, his name is very evident all around Cortland. And he's such a big shot that his name is also very much in evidence down in Westchester County as well. So he's one of these big guys. But eventually, Lisa, if you want to go ahead and click that. Eventually, this land started to get divided up, and it started to trickle down to the small people. And as that was happening, there was always an exception. If you follow the deed record at the Historical Society, you're going to see that the portions, always with an exception for the cemetery, were passed to Jones in 1808, Gardner, Barney, Catskill Bank, another big shot, but somehow or another something went awry there, obviously from a financial standpoint. And then this guy bought it away from the bank, probably a fire sale. And then it went to Parker in 1867 in Hatfield, which you can actually see their name there. You can also see Hatch on there. I'm not sure if you've seen that yet.
Yeah. Look at that.
I'm wondering. Makes me wonder. So in 1808, when this land was being transferred, first exception for a burial ground, we also see our first known burial, which is this fellow named John Calvert in 1808. Meanwhile, just in terms of a larger context, and again, a lot of people already know this, but Cortland County was split off of Onondaga County in 1808. And then it was, the town of Cortlandville was split off from the town of Homer in 1829, and then village of Cortland was incorporated in 53, and then it was chartered, the city of Cortland was chartered in 1900 by Teddy Roosevelt, did the signing on that. So again, it's gone from the big shot to the small people, and the land is basically this cemetery that's been allocated. It is not associated with any church, by the way. It was a true community cemetery, in the sense that maybe Cortland Rural Cemetery is not affiliated with a church either. It's just all denominations, all walks of life. So let's talk a little bit about the town of South Cortland, the hamlet of South Cortland. At 1860, after, again, Cortlandville being split off in 1808, the population grew to 161 people. The earliest industry was marl. Does anybody know what, probably a lot of people here know what the marl is. Anybody want to know what marl and what marl production is? You're cheating because you're on Lime Hollow. Go ahead, sir.
No, it's a material in the soil and the earth that you mine for, I don't remember what the use for it is, but it's a mine.
Right. If you go out on Lime Hollow Road and Gracie Road, there are these ponds that they look nice in the spring, but they empty out, and then it's left with this like white mucky substance. So basically, they would dredge that white mucky substance up, and I'm assuming it has some lime content, but they would use it for whitewash. They would use it in making bricks. They would use it for all kinds of things. They would also take ice off of the ponds too and use those for refrigeration back in those days. But they took something off the top, they took something off the bottom, and the water just kind of evaporated, as water will do. But that's one of the first industries. But the interesting thing I think about this area was it was kind of a thriving little community for a while. It had 2 churches over time, dry goods store, there was a tavern and an inn, a post office, it had its own newspaper. And I guess probably the equivalent of a penny saver today. It had a grist mill, a sawmill, a cheese creamery, a cheese factory and creamery, weaving shop, comb factory, and a 4-horse stage, as Jim Dempsey, who saw this presentation a couple days ago. I'm very intrigued now with stagecoaches. So I'm wondering if that's one carriage with 4 horses, or it's just 4 horses and cereal, and like the Pony Express. So I have to learn about this. What I think is really interesting about this is the ebb and flow of communities. So what I find interesting about this is, you know, at some point this was a thriving community, they may even saw for themselves a future out there. But then you'll see it just kind of trickle down to a bunch of houses and an antique store, and there's not much out there. And I think what happened was there was this sucking motion towards the city of Cortland, and the economy and the retail and the development all went towards the city because the city was more successful. It became a hub from a political standpoint and an economic standpoint. So there's this move to the city of Cortland. And now the pendulum, I think, is kind of swinging back the other way. We've got this concern that, you know, development is moving out to South Cortland because of the Walmarts and pulling away retail space. And so I just think that's kind of an interesting thing from a historical standpoint. You know, time kind of swings back and forth like that, and all of a sudden development is moving out there. We've got, you know, Walden, Oaks, and we've got people living back out there again. I just think that's kind of interesting from a historical standpoint, demographics and whatnot. So moving on to 1900s, basically you can see this trend. So 1808, there's John Culvert, and you can see it kind of spikes up. A whole bunch of people died in 1856, so I have to do some research on that and see what was it about 1856. Seems like there's a big spike right on that date. And then it kind of trickles back down, and you can see just by the gravestones alone, you see the ebb and flow of that community and how it grew and prospered, and it just kind of fell back into ruin, so to speak, and went back to obscurity. So that's all going on, and the last known interment is this gentleman, Daniel McAllister, in 1932. You can see, this is a cool thing. Online I did this. I stumbled upon this collection of photographs called the Cornell Institute Resource Management. Basically, it's the IRIS program. And at some point in time, the institution decided they were going to start flying planes over the rural Northeast. Now, whether they were doing that because of defense purposes, that they were concerned about what was happening in Europe at the time, or they were just trying to use aerial photography and understand it better. But I was able to keep zooming in, and so I got these photographs of the cemetery. So there you can see it in 1955 series. Obviously, just nothing but you know, farm fields, etc. The 1966 series, you can actually see the tractors and probably bulldozer marks as they were putting in the structure that is now the Murray Center. And obviously, a little bit to the north, that would be Smith Corona. I met a nice gentleman as a result of this noise I've been making on the cemetery, a guy named John Rush, who's at Cornell. And he also found a photograph from the same IRIS series in 1936. So, and that's fascinating to me because planes are not that safe back in the early 30s, and some fellow was either piloting and taking photographs, he was multitasking while he was piloting, or he had somebody looking over, you know, you see the scarf and you can see the, you know, I just think that kind of is a fascinating visual. So this is online now, and it's kind of cool, and it's kind of giving us a better sense of how the place developed. So if you want to go ahead, Lise. Today, it's basically cared for by the town of Cortlandville, cared for being in quotes, or should be. But frankly, they're doing a good job, and they have to do so by law. The not-profit law from New York State, Article 15 mandates. And if you want to get into the legality of it, I've got the actual document at the back of the presentation. But it mandates that the town has to care for cemeteries that have basically been abandoned and nobody's caring for them anymore. And that's by law. And that means, and it's a loose interpretation of what that means. And care for is probably a very vague term. It also says they're supposed to put a budget line in place, and they also have to put up appropriate fencing, which is also debatable what counts for appropriate fencing. So the good news is, I think, by and large, that cemetery has actually been pretty well cared for by the town of Cortlandville. Interestingly, I'm not sure that they know that there are 15 such cemeteries in the town of Cortlandville, so I'm not sure how much attention they're paying to some of the others in that circle that surrounds the city of Cortland. And I don't even know where they all are, which we'll get to in a few minutes. Oh, sorry, Lisa, I just want to make sure I give credit to, there are volunteers at O'Donnell, Round Rockwell. There are other people who just kind of walk in there every now and again and they pick up sticks and garbage and they just kind of tidy the place up a little bit. And thankfully they don't go in with bolts and steel and try and fix the stones and right them, because that's a total no-no. You don't want to do that from an archaeological standpoint. So unfortunately you can't do a lot to save these, which is a whole other discipline, talking about that. But the good news is they're out there because they care and they're doing something and trying to make the place a nice place. And then this was just last week. But obviously Google has not caught up with the satellite images because Walmart is absent. So there's the Murray Center over here. There's the cemetery, this nice little bit of green. Plant life is a really interesting subset of cemetery study because you get into evergreens and why evergreens and willows and why willows. We won't get into that. There's the Smith Corona building. There's the beautiful polo field, which is now the beautiful Walmart, Super Walmart. There's the South Cortland Cemetery, as I mentioned. There's Walden Oaks, and there's the Walden Place Living Center. So you can see it's being surrounded even more than it ever was before. It used to be just fields, and now, of course, industry is kind of encroaching on it. And I don't think that anybody's got any deviant plans to uproot the cemetery and move them. As Dick Tupper said in the same article that I was featured in, that's a pretty big hurdle to jump over. But nevertheless, I think it makes sense to pay attention to this since it is being encroached upon. And it wouldn't surprise me that somebody builds something very close to it, if not on it.